good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Socialize World event by Digimind. My name is Olivier Girard, but please call me Oli. I'm heading the Digimind office here in Singapore, where I've lived for the last 8 years, and I've been working for Digimind for almost 12 years now. Today, I'm very thrilled to be with you to open our Digimind Socialize World, starting here in Singapore. We are lucky to be the first region to start, and we will be together for a couple of hours, but don't hesitate to also join the other Socialize sessions starting later in other parts of the world, Paris, Europe, Amsterdam, Madrid, Mexico, and USA. I'm very proud to share that we've reached more than 750 registration attendees across 57 countries, and we have organized a lot of sessions, a lot of speakers. So please don't hesitate to also check the other Socialize sessions. So what is Socialize? Socialize, for those of you who don't know what the Socialize events are about, let me maybe start with a quick summary of what it is. Our Socialize event started a few years ago, and we usually have a couple of events per year in each region. So we started, of course, in Singapore, but we also expanded it to other places like Jakarta back at the start of 2018. We run our first Socialize outside of Singapore in Jakarta, in fact. But we also, of course, run Socialize in Singapore quite regularly. And over the last few years, we did it in July 2018, May 2019. And to put it very simply, the Socialize events are a moment where we share industry knowledge, we share best practices, we connect with people, and of course, we socialize. The last couple of events that we ran were in Kuala Lumpur at the end of 2019, and the official last Socialize that we did was in Manila in November 2019. And then we all know what happened in 2020, and we didn't run any of these Socialize events last year. So we want to start again the initiative and start quite strong with the Socialize World instead of one event at a time. Okay, let's get back to today's event and let's have a look together at the program. So we will be together for a couple of hours, and today's agenda will be split into two parts. The first hour will be our panel discussion with two prestigious guests around customer experience and customer journey. We will keep about 15 minutes towards the end of the discussion for the Q&A, okay? The second part of the agenda will be either a look at the essential use cases with social listening, or a presentation of our roadmap if you are already a Digimind user. In fact, the Digimind users can choose which session to join, so please feel free to also navigate. Do just remember that the Socialize Singapore finishes at the end of the second session, the second part, and we won't ask you to return to the main stage. So the closing speech will be in each session. In terms of time management, it's a little bit easier to run it like that. Okay, just a very quick message about the platform that we are using to run this event. So we are using Hopin. I believe the navigation on the platform should be quite intuitive, but please do use the chat if you have any technical questions, if you encounter any issues, or if you want to also ask questions to the panelists later. Please remember to indicate who the question is for, so it will help us to direct the questions to the right person. It would be a lot easier to manage the flow of questions. And all of the questions for the panelists will be shared at the end of the discussion. Again, easier for us to manage the list of questions and how we develop the discussion with the panelists. Later, after the panel discussion, you will be asked to move to your session, so the breakout rooms, which is on the left-hand side. I think a couple of clicks and you should go into that room pretty easily. Okay, talking about our panelists, and without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome today our first panelist, Guy Callaway, who is the Communication Director at Nestlé Indonesia. Guy, thank you for joining us today. Would you like to share a few words about yourself?
Thank you, Ollie. Great to be here. Yeah, so as Ollie said, I'm currently based in Indonesia, looking after consumer comms across all of our brands. Over 20 years with the Nestlé Group and across quite a few markets as well. And really, this is my job, but it's also quite a passion, I think, which always helps. And really leading the brand teams towards being or contributing to our corporate purpose. Also leading media insights as well as activations in our e-business transformation. So yeah, lots of good topics to discuss for today as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you for joining, and impressive experience indeed. All right, and our second panelist is Francis Del Val, who is the president and CEO of Cobina Business Analytics and Strategy. Okay, let's give Francis a couple of minutes to fix the sound issue. What I would suggest is maybe we can proceed with the panel discussion and start with how we will look into the key topic for today. So we all know that COVID-19 has turned the world upside down and forced us into new habits, new ways of working, new ways of consuming, new ways of educating, socializing, etc. So with social distancing, all of the behaviors have changed, and the customer journey also has changed quite a lot. People are going out less, spending most of their time at home. So the very first question that I would like to bring is, what would you say is the most significant change or disruption? Maybe Guy, if you don't mind starting, so that we give Francis a couple of minutes to fix the sound issue. Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, look, there's been talk, I think now for over 12 months about what is changing and how significant all these disruptions are. But I think in the context of today, it's an interesting realization on the utility of the mobile, particularly. And well, from an Indonesian perspective, that's definitely the case. I mean, definitely a very high mobile penetration, high internet penetration, high use of social, etc. High use of also some super apps, but it's definitely accelerated not only the usage but the utility value, and that's utility, I guess, both from a consumer customer perspective as well as from a brand perspective and a company perspective as well. So yeah, I think it's the reliance or the reliance on the utility value and what new utilities have consumers discovered, right, on the mobile experience. So I would say that's kind of one part of it. It's definitely accelerated, obviously, purchase. It's been definitely, I guess, a step change in terms of taking e-commerce to another level. And I think from that perspective, interestingly, drive more value around the role of e-commerce and also the e-wallet. The third piece I would say is, I think, around how consumers or what consumers are then looking for in terms of maybe search is not quite the right word, but the trust that they place in their relationship with what they're with content as well. So yeah, that I think they're kind of the key drivers of the disruption.
And I totally agree with the connection between the trust, consumer trust related to the content, and how we can actually create the content that resonates within the consumers, especially when we take into account all of the parameters of the pandemics. And Okay, thank you, Guy, for the feedback. Francis, I think you're back, and we can hear you now.
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Perfect. We can hear you loud and clear. Maybe
Okay, so now we'll just wait for the video to come on because it's not coming on.
Okay, at least we have the sound. It's not too bad. Would you like
Yes.
to very briefly introduce yourself, Francis? And
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Apologies, I don't know what's happening to the technical bits. We did rehearse yesterday, but I guess you can't always count on technology. Francis Del Val, I'm the president and CEO of Cobina. We are a data sciences and management consulting organization working in Asia, and we have offices in the United Kingdom as well as in the US. I'm very pleased to be here. Have been working with Digimind over the past 4 years, and we really love it as a tool. We've been also having a lot of work with many organizations in the region. And of course, Nestle is one of our favorite clients as well, where we work quite a lot on Nestle brands using Digimind. So pleasure to be here, Olivier. And good afternoon, Guy.
Thank you, Francis. And no apology, no need to apologize. I was also starting the session with my microphone muted. So it happens. It happens. We know that. Francis, thank you very much for joining this session. And we've started the panel discussion, as you can see. And I was, of course, sharing that 2020 has been a very, very difficult year with a lot of changes. What would you say would be the most significant change or disruption that you've noticed in 2020 on your side?
What we've seen here in the Philippines is that there's really a rush to digital. We all know that. A lot of growth. We are social reports that, for instance, from January 20 to 2021, there's a growth of at least 5 million in terms of internet users. Now we have about 67% of individuals are online. That's 74 million. And of course, we know that for those who are online, 92% of them go online every day. So that's really a massive opportunity that's just been unlocked as a result of the pandemic. I don't think those kinds of growth rates would have been possible if this was not forced upon us. And we see this migration not just happening across age groups. We do know that a lot of our elderly folks have already gone digital, but we've also seen that even in the grassroots, the lower socioeconomic class, they have been forced to adopt digital as well.
Very true. Yeah, and I do remember when we were discussing this that you also have some statistics around the usage of mobile in the Philippines. I remember that the Philippines is one of the strongest countries when it comes to mobile penetration and also time online. So I can imagine that you feel that.
Yes. We're really seeing a lot of people spending more time online on social media, and social media not just for networking, but also social media for business. We see a lot of communities going online and a lot of trade happening online because this is possible even when there's a lockdown.
Perfect. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, I think I guess Francis, your camera is not working, but we will do without for now, unfortunately. Bear with us.
I'm not going away, so I'm just going to be here.
Perfect. Okay, all right. Thank you for sharing this first question with us. Maybe let's move to the second one, which is very much about how the customers are adopting the digital channels. And you both touched on that. And as you said, Francis, some of the elderly went online more and more because of the situation. So in your opinion, what are some ways brands can maintain customer touch points without that real life experience somehow? Maybe Francis, you want to start with this one?
Yes, we're seeing that the most active brands on digital from the time of the lockdown here in the Philippines, which began middle of March, all the way up to the latter part of June. We had one of the longest lockdowns in Asia. And we've seen that the brands that remained active throughout this period remained very, very engaged with their customers. And we're seeing we're seeing company brands, but we're also seeing individual brands. And how are they maintaining their relationship with their customers? Well, they are using different kinds of channel. Of course, YouTube was a very, very important channel, but Facebook was equally important. And then further down, what we did see is that a lot of the brands started engaging consumers in terms of communities. So there were Facebook communities, but also in dark social. So Viber was an increasingly active player in dark social. There were so many Viber communities that were being formed, and this is where people started to be able to sell recipes that they baked in the middle of the day. They started selling wines. They started even providing fruits, vegetables in the communities. And further down, we also started seeing Instagram as a very important opportunity to connect with clients. So everywhere, really, your imagination was the only limitation that you had in being able to connect with your consumers.
And I know Viber is very strong, very, very big in the Philippines, and it's quite interesting to hear that the discussions have also moved into that format. Guy, on your side, I do remember that you shared a couple of days ago with us the different touch points that you created with your consumers, and bringing that experience to them one way or the other. Can you share with us? I found it really interesting.
Yeah, so I think maybe it sounds like a really basic thing, but in retrospect, incredibly important to what decision we made. And if we all think back, 12 months ago, we were all wondering, actually, from an advertising perspective, what should we do, right? Do we keep budgets? Do we cut budgets? How long is this going to last, et cetera, et cetera? So I think just as a key point, that we definitely maintained the touch points, a lot of the touch points, and if we couldn't maintain them, for example, a lot of the offline, we made sure that we were moving offline to online, and we were in I would say, a very fortunate position from a company perspective, that we were able to actually double down on our media and on digital as well, because the best marketing theory says in times of crisis, the worst thing you can do is walk away, right? And we were absolutely able to stick to our plans and in fact increase. So, but then the question was, what are we going to do with all of the funds that we plan for our offline activities? So to give you scale, we do sampling and activations in a normal year, or 2019. Up to like 35,000 touch points a year offline, and like 20 million, 30 million samples. So that's an incredible face-to-face consumer engagement moment that we were basically wiping out. And that decision we made in one day to stop. And of course, it was the right decision to make. Not only because there was restricted mobility, but from our own people's health and safety perspective, which was a priority. So what was interesting was that very early on we were all craving that human connection that very quickly was taken away from us. So we needed to make sure that connection was maintained as much as we could, and that brand engagement was maintained. Yeah. So I think in terms of how we changed, also our view on digital was very much beyond one-way advertising, which is what a lot of us use it for and still do, understandably, but as an engagement tool, and two-way. So we launched, for example, like WhatsApp, we call it Kuala WhatsApp. So like WhatsApp groups, which is almost like mini online activations, but very personalized. We took a lot of our offline activations and events and made them virtual. So a good example on that is from the Milo brand. So Milo is associated with sports. We run a big marathon every year in Jakarta, 10K marathon that normally would have 15, 20, 25,000 participants. You can't do a marathon in the middle of a pandemic. But the benefit of taking that marathon to a virtual run, so we literally went online with a virtual running event, was that we were able to expand the exposure of that event to outside of Jakarta and in fact across the whole country. So we went from 20,000 face-to-face participants live offline to I think we got up to about 45,000 across the country virtually. So it's never going to be the same exactly, but it enabled us to maintain that that engagement to a certain degree and in a very different way as well.
Guy, would you say that it sounds like a success when you just look at the numbers and how many people you actually reach out to with the Milo Marathon, going from 20,000 up to 40 plus? Would you say that you will keep that moving into the next years? Because there's also the reality of it's easier to organize when it's virtual. But yeah,
no. we will keep it in some form, maybe as a bit more of an always-on type of thing. Okay. Perhaps the benefit also of going online is that you get some first-party data, which everyone is needing at the moment or looking for as well in a more efficient form. But no, we won't fully go online. I mean, our brands are very much built on education as well and that personalized engagement. So I think it'll come back to an interesting balance.
I think so, and the mindsets are also evolving. Well, we've been forced to evolve quite rapidly over the last year and still now. And I think some part of it will remain moving forward. Finding the right balance. Again, it's not the activation, but also on a lot of different things. You were talking about the safety of the employees. That's also something we need to integrate into the strategy when, as an employer, when we want to develop our business. That's very interesting. Maybe if you're okay to share the second example that you brought us a couple of days ago with the drive-through.
Okay. So I guess that's a good example now of how we've pivoted back to I would say an adapted offline, because we knew from Google, Google Mobility Index, for example, that we watch, I think, like a hawk every week, because mobility has a big impact on shopping habits, eating out of home, eating in home, etc. So we actually launched last weekend in one city of Indonesia, in Makassar, and a drive-through activation. So it was a brand experience, which normally we would do, pre-COVID in a mall or something like that. But we could see that mobility was coming back. Families want to get out of the house in a safe way. So the idea came to, why not? We still want to do an experiential activation that's offline, but in a safe way. And if people are getting out of their houses in cars, then why don't we do a drive-through activation? So it's when you put the pieces together, you kind of go, it makes sense, and it was a great success. It was really good. We'll look to roll that out as well going forward.
I like what you just said, the adapted offline, because this is what we're talking about. It's not necessarily online or offline. It could also be the adapted offline, and I really think that it's a very smart way to still be compliant with the regulation and what we have to bear in mind, but still bring some experience to the consumers. Thank you, Guy, for sharing this. Okay, maybe I will move on to the next question, and this one is more about how basically of course there's so much data, as you said, Guy. There's so much data online, and it's getting quite difficult to get a glimpse of everything in one go. So, of course, social media listening is a pretty important component in that sense. How these social listening and all of that data, what are the key takeaways that you believe really helped shape the strategy, especially with the context of the pandemic? Maybe Francis, do you wanna share your input on this one?
Right. So social media listening is a very, very important tool to have during this pandemic. And a big part of that is because face-to-face market research is extremely difficult. And if you want to be able to get quick feedback about how your consumers are thinking, what are their sentiments, then social intelligence is really very, very important. In fact, in Cobina, we call it digital consumer intelligence because it's an opportunity to really understand the raw sentiment that consumers feel about certain events, how they are responding, and what are they doing about it, because some are acting on it, some are very much emotionally engaged, and some are, of course, innovating as a result of what they're picking up on social media. So for instance, we've seen at the period of the lockdown, at the beginning, people were very much engaged. They loved cooking recipes. They loved the novelty of being forced to work from home, because all of a sudden, the guilt that many moms or many parents felt that they were not able to take care of their children before, now they could in fact do that from the comfort of their home. So at the beginning, there was a lot of interest in novel recipes. There was a lot of search happening in terms of what are the kinds of ingredients for specialty food, so that moms could cook really good lunches and dinners for their family. But what we did notice was that after about 6 weeks, that started to taper off. And then further down, immediately after the quarantine was lifted, everyone started shifting back again to ready-to-cook meals. Because now, the same mother who's had a lot of really good bonding times with her family now has to be able to attend to working from home, schooling their children at home. So all of a sudden, all of these pressures are there that she has to contend with all over again. And therefore, convenience became a very, very important consideration. So all of these rapid changes in consumer sentiments, you're able to pick up through social intelligence. And we did this not just for brands, but we also did it in terms of sentiments of consumers with respect to the reopening up of the economy. So in the Philippines, Cobina became the official digital intelligence partner of the Interagency Task Force. And the Interagency Task Force created Ingat Angat, which is lift with care, so to speak, transliterated. But it's basically to encourage consumers to be more confident about going out by following safety protocols, to be able to encourage the opening up of the economy. And at the beginning, you could see that there was a lot of excitement. People really wanted to go back and do things, but they were still very scared. So there was a lot of skepticism at the beginning, and we would throw back this information to the people behind Ingat Angat so that they could tweak the communication and be responsive to how people were feeling. So what we had was a tool, rapid assessment of sentiments, being able to communicate it back to the organizers so that the organizers could immediately respond and come up with messages that were more relevant, that resonated with the consumers. And it also allowed them to identify where were the pockets of resistance to the campaign, so that they could individually approach these groups, engage with these groups, and share with them what was the logic behind this campaign, so that they could properly communicate to everyone who was interested what is really the goal that was being tried, that was being espoused by the group. So for us, digital consumer intelligence is almost like listening to 1,000 focus group discussions happening all at the same time. And we feel it's very important because it's really about consumers communicating what they feel. So for us, it's the raw sentiment, the unfiltered biases that are being picked up by digital consumer intelligence. And that's really the value of social listening.
Absolutely, and of course, Francis, I cannot agree more than that. And I like the way that you're actually talking about the digital consumer intelligence as a whole, not just social media, but the whole of the digital space. And as you said, there's a lot of uncertainties at the moment, a lot of fears, a lot of worries that is being communicated online, of course. Being able to shape the communication, to shape the communication around those, to alleviate those fears, to make sure that we can really answer and help also on I guess different levels. I think it's really key. We've seen, I mean, from the Digimind side, we've seen the volume of information last year going really accelerating a lot online. The volume of data online accelerating quite a lot and rapidly. Guy, on your side, in terms of social media listening, what is the your approach on this side?
Yeah. So I think, again, it comes back to that pivotal, probably 2 or 3 week period last year when it became very obvious that everything was about to change and do it, and very quickly. And the thing that was really top of our mind was, number one, I have to say we were fortunate in that sense that we got a lot of learnings from the China team, actually, in terms of just that first probably month. So we were really having to make decisions around, like I said before, do the brands stay active and live? What is all our current content sitting on websites, sitting on social media, TV ads for all of our active brands? Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? And how do we need to adapt the messaging? So we basically had to scrape every single piece of content and ecosystem that we had, and change and adapt. Where did the listening piece come in was actually to help us talk from the brand point of view with the empathy of how the consumers were talking, how our consumers are talking. I mean, there's no research, right, for this. So it's like, what are the word clouds from the last time? I mean, just wasn't there. So we have to be very careful that we were talking in the right language, also, but staying true to the brands, right? And there was a time at the beginning last year where it was appropriate for some brands to stay on, and it was not appropriate for others. But also that's from a consumer point of view, but also from where the company was focusing as well. So yeah, in terms of language, very important. What words were they using? What were they looking for? What were their pain points or their questions? And then making sure that was kind of also being reflected in our content and our communications as well. As time then went on, I think it was about also looking for new tensions and new opportunities in terms of how their behavior was changing. How are mums dealing with being super mum in the household environment, juggling everything? How were the shopping habits changing? What products were they now trying that they were not trying before? What information are they looking for? And then basically saying, how does that then translate into our engagement strategies, whether it's through the call center, through our social ads, etc. And one of those behaviors really that was coming out very early, and I'm sure many of the people listening know about it, was the Dalgona phenomenon, right? So Dalgona coffee absolutely exploded in the first quarter of last year in Southeast Asia, and is a social phenomenon. It started to emerge in Q1, and we picked up on that for Nescafe very, very, very early, and it made complete sense about why it was exploding, because Indonesia is a coffee culture. There is a coffee shop, and you can get a cup of coffee every 50 meters. It is ubiquitous, and it's great coffee at that, wherever you want to get it. But that coffee experience had gone. you know, that moment of spending time with friends or having an ice copy on the way to the office or whatever was disappeared. So Dalgona was kind of it was a trigger or a relief moment, I guess, to what the consumer had missed and now wanted to bring in home. So kind of that out-of-home coffee experience that the consumer could do in home. So we jumped on that pretty quickly. And that absolutely exploded the growth of the brand last year. I mean, we were up 130% of prior year. Yeah? It was massive. So that was obviously listening was a big part of that.
Thanks a lot, Guy. And as you said, there's no history of the global pandemic. So where do we get the data from? It's quite hard to anticipate and prepare, shape the communication moving forward. Francis, I believe you have some feedback on this as well.
Yes. So it's really quite interesting that Guy brought up the point about Dalgona. So in the Philippines, as part of our digital consumer intelligence, we were watching the trends, and Dalgona did trend a fair bit after it was seen in a Korean telenovela. Consumers already started talking about Dalgona. And what happened? There were two brands in the Philippines that really benefited a lot. And of course, unsurprisingly, they're both Nestle brands. Nescafe benefited a lot, and Milo benefited a lot. And but that's not all. So when in the Philippines, we know from digital consumer intelligence that anything Korean just basically explodes. So Dalgona is one example, something that happened in a Korean telenovela. But what we also found out is that throughout the lockdown, people were just kept on watching Korean telenovelas. They continued to listen to Korean pop artists, K-pop artists, and this kept on going. And of course, one of the trends was that food trends, anything Korean was being consumed massively. People were creating combinations, and again, to Guy's point, people wanted to experience what there was happening, what they could experience externally in home. So for instance, soju combined with Yakult trended in a big way because this was something that consumers would get pre-pandemic from a bar, but now in home they just kept on posting about soju plus Yakult and then having a marvelous time. So capturing external moments in home, capturing Korean culture that they were extremely happy with in home was something that we picked up in digital consumer intelligence. And then later on, because we also conduct quant research, what we also find out is that they're very consistent. Whatever we see happening in the digital domain, in the qualitative aspect, so to speak, we in fact are able to validate this when we conduct quantitative surveys. And mind you, our quantitative surveys are on using 1,600 consumers nationwide, and they're extremely consistent. Back to you, Olivier.
Thank you, Francis. And first, I'm a bit shocked by the soju and the Yakult, I have to say. I will probably need to test that because on paper it doesn't seem very appealing. But very interesting the point that you bring in terms of quantitative survey to also confirm those trends. Social listening could be one of the signal that you will take into account, but then you can also activate the other, I would say, more traditional researches to confirm that. That's really good. That's really interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna move forward with the next question, which is pretty much the normal flow of how you feel the customer journey will evolve in the coming I would say years. We've seen that the changes it happened very quickly. So how do you stay innovative? How do you stay ahead of your competition? Yeah, Guy, if you want to start.
Just very briefly from me, because I think there's one for me. There's kind of one overarching answer, and that's omnichannel. You know, marketers we're good in doing media plans, but at the end of the day, everything still is in silos. Might sound like a generalization, but the reality of omnichannel now is reality. So ensuring that there is consistency across omnichannel, whether that's offline or online, it doesn't matter anymore, is really going to be key. So apart from all of the other benefits that ultimately omnichannel measurement will have in terms of actually understanding the value of touch points, but yeah, I'd say that's key. A part of that then, or maybe a secondary point that is becoming all the more important, is engagement. Engagement is now becoming more and more possible and expected across touch points that traditionally we wouldn't necessarily have talked about as being engaging, right? So live shopping, for example, is a fantastic experience. And I think back to a little bit to what Francis was referring to before. If I can't get my experience out of home now, or I can't go offline, then I just want experiences on everything where I can get it, right? And that's where all the digital platforms themselves are also leveling up, right? Because the expectation of experience.
Perfect. Thank you, Guy. Francis, on your side, in terms of innovation and how you think, does it resonate, the omni-channel from Guy?
No, absolutely. What we're seeing right now is that it's very important for marketeers to be able to think about offline to online integration and vice versa. What does it mean? For instance, for one of our major clients who are in the retail area, they have realized that although they have an online portal, the online portal is like a catalog. So consumers would browse the online portal, they'd have an idea of that pretty red dress they want to be able to buy. They have an idea of the actual price, but they still want to be able to fit it. So when they go to the store, they actually know exactly. Women are very, very clear. These are the options that I want, but I still want to be able to try it on. So it's very important that you create the journey online, but you have to make sure that whatever you're showing online is available offline in the wide variety of choices at the exact promotional offer that you have, so that you make it easy for consumers. When they finally go into your store, they say, that's exactly what I want to be able to buy. And then they go in, they buy it, they go off. Because remember, the shopping experience is still important, but they are concerned about safety. So they don't want to stay too long in a particular venue. So if you make it easy for them, then that's something that they will definitely appreciate.
I really like the online to offline and vice versa. I think we need to also think about the two ways, how we can translate some of the online into offline and offline to online. We naturally thought about the offline to online because of the situation, but what about the now activating the online to offline? That finding the right balance will be certainly key in terms of strategy and innovation moving forward.
And I think what's also important for us to understand is that while we have an explosion in terms of consumers accessing digital, we know for a fact in the Philippines that the digital divide exists. 30% of the population still do not have access to the internet. And this 30% of the population, they're mostly in the rural areas. They are away from the highly urbanized centers. So we need to be mindful that while digital is very important, there are people who are still unable to get there. Now, what we don't want is to have different kinds of messaging. So we want to make sure, because after all, it's the same consumer, right? So we want to make sure that whatever we're talking about on above the line, on traditional media, and now digital is exactly the same thing that we are communicating at point of sale, perhaps even in the local sari stores, because that is still where our consumers go to. And it's still the same consumer who ultimately will be exposed to many of our communication messages, regardless of the platform that we are communicating it at.
And yeah, I guess it resonates with what Guy was saying, omni-channel, and making sure that the communication is consistent across all of the channels. That's certainly a lot of work. All right, and I guess it brings me to the next question, which is more about if you have one, I would say one trend, one innovation that you would like to see in 2021, and you foresee that this is going to be really being strong, what would you say this is going to be? It's a tricky one.
Yes. Look, I think it's going to be the race for personalization. And considering cookieless, so I think it's going to be driven from a marketer perspective, need rather. When you say specifically 2021, I think that's probably going to be a key. Yeah, data partnerships.
Okay.
Has to be a part of that.
Okay, and and Francis, on your side?
It's quite similar to what Guy was mentioning. It's really all about data-driven marketing. What we do know is that here in the Philippines, quite a lot of the conglomerates are already harvesting the data that they're able to get from their platforms. So a lot of the major conglomerates have apps, whether they are loyalty card apps, whether they are platforms for payments. They're coming either to us or they're building their own teams. And what they're doing is they're really mining the data. With this increased understanding that with the data comes a lot of insights about consumer habits, and therefore you can cross-sell, you can upsell, you can get ideas in terms of what are the trends, what is it that will get them to purchase, or will even get them to possibly visit your physical store. Many companies right now are in a rush to be able to build that competency around data-driven insighting. And that's really something that's going to be here to stay. We saw it at the beginning of the pandemic. We saw it at the beginning of last year, pre-pandemic. And then as the pandemic kicked in and many of the organizations realized with digital data, it's really almost sinful for you not to be doing something about the data that you're collecting. And that's really what we say. It's closed loop. It's closed loop marketing. You're able to harvest the data and do something with your data. And that's really not just a fad. It's going to be a trend that's going to be here to stay.
Yeah, and I guess data-driven marketing and data-driven decisions will be here more and more data online, more and more data to analyze and play with. I guess it's a nice transition to my next question, which is very much with the pandemic, we have seen a lot of data coming in, and I mean, Digimind, we are specialized in that field. We have seen the online data growing over the last 23 years, but obviously last year was a sharp increase. And how do we manage this infodemic, that infobesity, if some people use that word as well, or even like the misinformation associated with that? So do you have already like strategies, I mean, for coming from the brand or coming from different angle to manage all of that?
Yeah, I was just thinking actually of something else. This infodemic also is a problem for marketers because it's overwhelming. So first you've got to work out, I guess, from the brand perspective, what's important. And understand that first. I think what I've seen, and this is as much about the amount of information as how we've had to learn to manage ourselves during the pandemic, and for our consumers is you have to be very, very clear on what your brand stands for, and that has to be relevant in the time, right? There was a lot of brands at the beginning that were talking about pandemic issues that had absolutely nothing to do with the brand itself. So I think, as we also have to be responsible brand builders here, and ensure that we're conscious about what we are, what knowledge we're sharing or what information we're sharing. From consumers' perspective, you can't stand for everything for all people. I mean, we know that. I would say, at least from our brand's perspective, every brand, every strong brand has a strong point of view. So it's about saying, okay, I want to make sure that I am, from the consumer POV, an expert in 1, 2, and 3, and kind of that's it. And that's how search works, right? You've got to prioritize what you want to own. So you can help consumers by actually prioritizing on your search strategies, and that's can sometimes be a difficult decision. But not only will it help you prioritize, it'll help you win in what's important for the brand, and make sure that the consumers that are actually looking for that information gets to you first, rather than getting lost in the pool of a lot of useless information or not very valuable information. And this shows the role of brands as well to consumers and how they trust brands. Because there are a lot of consumers in our part of the world who do turn to brands for trusted knowledge and trusted information. And I think that's often important for brand builders and marketers to remember, that we also have a responsibility. So that's very much how I would look at it.
Yeah, I guess it's closely related to the CSR. Coming from the brand perspective, and how you communicate with the consumers, especially when it comes to subjects like the pandemics. Picking and choosing the data, definitely. More isolating the smart data out of that huge pool of information, and creating your own subset of what is relevant for you. Absolutely, this is the approach that we are usually pushing when we start projects.
Yep.
Francis, on your side, I guess you're very used to dealing with a lot of data in your day-to-day. How do you see the strategy moving forward?
Yeah. Going back to the basics, it's really all about brand cohesion. And we've already talked about it, brand cohesion in terms of online to offline. You've got to stay true to who you are as a brand. You need to be able to have the same tone of voice. You have to be able to remain authentic to who you are. And then, of course, communicate in a manner that resonates with your target market. So this is really marketing 101. However, because we're talking about digital, one thing that we really encourage a lot of our clients is that they need to be very, very clear that they have to own their digital assets in a manner that is really going to build a brand and not just communicate. What does it mean? Across the different social media assets, search, websites, e-commerce sites, there are different ways of engaging with consumers. And as you engage with consumers, you need to find that one method that is appropriate for that particular channel so that it resonates. So for instance, we know that in some channels, live feeds are very, very important. They're very engaging. Stories are very engaging. And therefore, if you use that format, then you have consumers who will be able to listen to your message. They will be able to cut out through the noise, through the clutter that is not important. But that's for that particular medium. If you're talking about another channel, let's say you're talking about something very visual on Instagram, that's not necessarily going to work on Facebook, because Facebook is all about engagement, it's all about stories, it's all about people sharing experiences. And for me, that's very important. We need to be able to help our consumers navigate through our brand messages, bearing in mind the media that they are in and the context by which they are viewing that particular piece of information. If we are very cognizant of these things, then we will be able to help our consumers understand our brands more on their terms.
I like the brand cohesion. As you said, you need to keep that brand message consistent, but still adapt it through the different channels. Okay, that's really interesting. I'm also mindful of the time, and there's a few questions on the chat. So what I will do is I will skip the last two panel questions so that I can look into the questions coming from the chat, and we can keep a few more minutes around the what our participants have put in the chat. One first question for you, Guy. With all the brands you are overseeing, did you see a difference in impact of going through lockdowns between the brands? And if you did, were there any trends found looking back?
Yeah, vast differences from double-digit positive to double-digit negative.
Wow. Okay.
I would say so. There was the kind of the obvious ones. The basic health products and brands, milk powder. We have a brand in Indonesia called Bear Brand, which is quite iconic, which did very well. So anything that had to do with prevention, better health, better nutrition was strong. Coffee also, like I said. So, and this is pretty similar to the global trends, right? Dolce Gusto, Nespresso, those brands did well as people were obviously spending more time at home. Confectionery, for example, a little bit less. And obviously our out of home business, or brands or products that are primarily consumed out of home, did struggle for a while. So interestingly, maybe one fun fact, during pandemic, and this is not just Indonesia, many countries, pet adoption, so adopting dogs and cats, increased dramatically last year. And so we have a pet care brand called Purina, so pet food, and Purina did well also. So people, they're really wanting to more nesting, looking after, if not kids, then a cat or a dog. So that also did well.
And I guess you can see that through the numbers of cat food, dog food.
Yes, of course.
Coming out.
Of course. So I would say basic trends: more conscious, preventative, and proactive health and nutrition, awareness and knowledge searching on the same. There was a big trend, and is still a big trend, around renegotiating value for consumers. Like, what does value now mean from what they expect from a brand? And that's to do with the economic issues as well, right? A lot of people are out of work, reduced incomes, etc. So that was a big one. And everything to do with staying at home. Yeah, so cooking, inspiration, education, all very strong drivers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess a lot of people are more and more mindful of health. I mean, with all of the messages around health, that has to be, there must be an impact on how they, the lifestyle, and how they drive their health on a day-to-day
basis. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's, back to the point before about information and trust, right? Where do I get the right information? What is right?
Yeah.
What should I do? What is the best product? Was very important.
Thank you, Guy. And interesting to see the double digits, positive or negative. That must be quite impressive. Another question, this time for you, Francis. What's the biggest learning you have gained through this pandemic in how you use social data for your clients?
I would say that there are two, in fact. The first one is that, there was a time that we thought, at least as far back as about 5 years ago, we thought that being in digital was a luxury. It was one of the those things that brand managers did, right? And we always said there's a digital manager who's gonna bother about all things digital, and then there's a brand manager who's going to take care of the brand and take care of the advertising and the sales and all of that. Now, what we realize is that in the pandemic, it's really about digital transformation. It's about the consumer who's now increasingly digital, who's now increasingly mobile dependent. Therefore, we need to make sure that it's no longer about digital marketing. It's marketing in a digital world, and the competency of staying relevant has got to be front and center to the marketer today in a pandemic, highly digital environment. And what are we seeing? To be able to stay relevant, brands have to ride context, what is happening. Because digital is very fast. So what we saw, for instance, is that last year, the brands that were very much that had the highest levels of engagement were brands that were putting out their information about their donations as early as the beginning of the year when there was a major volcanic eruption. And then they made relevant because people were talking about the pandemic and how they could help in terms of donating protective equipment to our frontline workers. And then later on, they stayed relevant because they were participating in terms of promoting the concept of hope. So brands that were in tune with what's happening in the digital domain and are able to respond very quickly to it, stay very relevant, stay very engaged with the consumers. Something that we noticed. And therefore, the other thing that brand managers need to bear in mind is that digital is a very, very important source of innovation. We have seen already many of our clients turning to digital to be able to understand what are the underlying trends that other clients are not seeing it or other competitors are not seeing it. We want to be able to ride those trends, whether it's flavors, because all of a sudden yam or ube is so popular now, but is increasing in popularity because people are cooking more of it at home, or whether it's all about increasing interest in certain ingredients because it's just more healthy, or certain interest in equipment because that is how they're going to be able to sustain their overall well-being in the home. So if you pay very close attention to the trends that's happening, whether it's in search, whether it's in social media discussion, whether it's in feeds that people are sharing, you're going to be able to pick up early on how you can innovate via new products, but innovate via promotional efforts, innovate via experiences. So again, bottom line, digital can be a very important source of staying relevant to the consumer at every time that there's an engagement that's taking place. And second, it's a very, very important source of insight that can fuel innovation.
Yeah, I totally relate to what you just shared, Francis. Even on our side, we have seen the demand, the request for consumer insights increasing quite significantly last year. And again, not necessarily brand related, but across all digital channels. Just trying to understand the new consumer behaviors, profiling of the consumers. So there is definitely so much information that you can come up with these insights, and that will help you to shape the strategy of the brands moving forward. All right. Thank you so much. I will stop the discussion, the panel discussion here, because I'm a bit mindful of the time and we are already overrunning. Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you so much, Francis, for sharing your experience, your knowledge. I really appreciate that. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Francis. And